Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining me. We're going to be taking a look at zones and microclimates here for lesson 4. And I was just talking with Elsa here, and we're going to have a peek at a short definition of zone 1. So let me just share that. And there we go. This is from a publication that Andrew did years ago for an introduction to permaculture. It was an introduction to permaculture ebook, and it's a great reference for a lot of things, and zones being one of them. So if we take a look at zone 1, that's defined as the area nearest to the home or an area of most traffic. So that's a key one there. It may not, it depends on your situation. If you're in an agricultural situation or hobby farm, that may spread out from your home here. And we're really looking at, we're currently looking at current zones in this lesson, not proposed zones. So that'll come later as we work on our design. But right now we're looking at how people move through the site currently. And that's really what zones are. It's all about usage. So part of that are elements that require daily attention, observation, and frequent upkeep. Now, there's quite a few things you could place into that, like a greenhouse during the growing season. We have our chicken coop right at the edge of our zone 1. So you could technically say it's zone 1, but it's not too close to our house. We didn't want it too close, but it's positioned really well. I can just turn my head, look out the window and see the coop and see the chickens, see how they're doing and whether there's any predator pressure or any concerns. So yeah, that is zone 1. And as we're designing, if we're bringing a lot of these elements that we need to observe on a daily basis closer to our home or the center of human activity, we're going to find that is just far more efficient and really helps us save time and energy in terms of maintenance. Things like kitchen gardens and herb gardens. We have one right outside our kitchen, and that's definitely a zone 1, and it has a certain level of maintenance associated with it, right? So because you walk by it every day, it's or multiple times a day, it gets a lot more care and attention. So if we look further out or further away from zone 1, those areas are typically getting less maintenance and less attention. So from a land design perspective, it's a really smart way to design a space, especially a homestead or a really well, it's a hobby farm or agricultural setting. So yeah, so there are some, I don't know if I really agree with this. I don't like having chickens in zone 1 because that might be a little too close, but certainly you want them on the edge of it. And compost bins, same thing. So again, our chicken coop is probably 100 feet from our house, but it's somewhere we visit multiple times a day, and it's not too far. It's probably more like 60 feet. But so it's right at the edge of our zone 1. So zone 2 is a little bit different. We're getting a little further out. We don't need to be visiting this quite as often. And it might be a little home orchard. And in fact, that's what we have, a small orchard, which would fall under the same zoning. So that, unfortunately, we can't see the image here. And so there are different settings to consider. So in an urban setting where the site is quite small, that may include some permanent plantings, or you may have longer vegetable crops, right? Potatoes or say cabbage or something, rather than quicker crops like lettuce or salad greens, that sort of thing. And often, actually, in an urban zone, you may only have three zones, 1, 2, and 3. Again, it is context specific. So again, if we look at zone 3, and that's known as a farming zone. So that's a place that we are going to put a lot of field crops, a lot of things that we are going to not necessarily visit on a daily basis. It's going to be more like once a week. And again, there are a number of different crops that fall into that. Here's some examples: corn and wheat and rice and bamboo, things that don't need daily attention.
But like even with pasture land in zone 3, I mean, we see our livestock every day.
Right.
But they're farther for sure. But we check on water every day.
Yeah. So
Um,
depending on your paddock or your pasture size, it may be just a portion of it, right?
yeah. Oh, I
You,
see. Oof.
yeah, you may not be going to the end of the,
Yeah. Yeah,
so
that makes sense.
that's
Yeah.
that's where you can think about how you're set up kind of reflects your traffic patterns.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing to go through first, is laying out your traffic patterns. Um, that can really help with the formulation of your zone map. Um,
Yeah, for sure. And my garden used to be, or my vegetable garden used to be in what I would consider zone 2. And then this year I moved it. It was a big to do, but I decided that it needed to be closer to the house. It's been game changer. So the
sure.
zones really matter.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. You want to have with our vegetable garden, the way our property is set up, we have a um, small sort of herb, lettuce greens, some heat loving crops in our zone 1 close to the house. And then as we go out, we get into those longer duration crops like potatoes and
Mhm.
cabbage and brassicas. Uh, but yeah, if we were doing it all over again, and we don't really have the space where our land is set up, but I would have probably everything all in one rectangle. A lot easier in terms of just getting your infrastructure and
Yeah,
just the irrigation infrastructure, if nothing
yeah,
else. So yeah, and then if we look at urban, that's going to be a little bit different. It may just be your lawn areas, right? So hence pasture in a farm setting, lawn areas in more of an urban setting here. And again, urban, that may be it for an urban area. You have your zone 1 around the house, you have some permanent plantings at zone 2, and then your um, lawn or kind of outer areas with other permanent planties as zone 3. That may be it. Because if we look at zone 4, they're more sort of semi-managed, and urban spaces tend to be so small that they do in fact get regular maintenance, just in terms of mowing lawns versus a larger homestead or farm. These outer areas may just be cut for hay. They may have animals going through them occasionally. They may have some fodder to go and cut seasonally. It may be a woodlot that you take a look at and get a little bit of firewood from. But again, it's very much semi-managed. And then you have zone 5, which this is where definitely you see some confusion occasionally. Zone 5 is an unmanaged wilderness area that requires no intervention. So that is a good definition to keep in the back of your head. And again, it's not really it's pretty rare to see in an urban setting. You'd have to be in a really specific location next to you know, an unmanaged park perhaps, but for the most part, that doesn't exist in urban areas. So just want to make sure people don't feel they have to
And,
throw 5 zones into their
and in a
map.
in a homestead, if you don't take care of an area, like you said, no intervention, but you do run paddock, like electric fences through it, would that be considered still zone 5? Like we don't do
No,
anything there.
yeah, zone 5 would be, you know, on the west coast here would be more of a wilderness area that's most likely forested,
Okay,
right? Yeah. So where I live, we have, you know, a good chunk of zone 5. We don't do any maintenance in it. We do walk through it
right,
and enjoy it, but we don't even when trees come down, we'll think twice about harvesting them because we're aware that you know they're part of the soil building process. So yeah, so zone 5 is great when you're on acreage. Very nice to have. And we certainly this year, my gosh, we've seen quite an explosion of diversity. Because we're very what's the right word? We are not a typical homeowner in our area. So things that make our property a little different is we don't mow all our grass weekly. We'll cut it with a scythe a couple of times a year. So we're encouraging longer grass, better habitat for insects, and over the last 5 years of really shifting that way, it's been amazing. Yeah, it's just incredible the amount of diversity we're seeing, even in the heat. So we've had a lot of heat this August, no, I guess July and August, up till today. And you know, there's still a lot of things flowering, there's a lot of pollinators out, and it's great, just great to see. So we like to encourage wildlife and reduce our risk. And another thing that's been very interesting that we've noticed is we're deer fenced, but we had a bear damage a section of fencing that we didn't fix in time, and we had 2 female deers come in and have fawns. So we've got 4 babies and 2 adult deer on 5 acres, and they're kind of stuck in here because the adults could jump over the fence, but there's no way for the babies to get out right now. They're too small. So we've had to modify our approach. They have taken out a lot of nice plants that we had, but and created some challenges for us. But the interesting thing is they've done such an amazing job of it's like having an animal on your property instead of a cow or
grazing,
goat. They've been grazing,
yeah,
and they have done an amazing job.
yeah,
I've never, you know, we've had them occasionally come on the property, but they've been here for months now, and they've really made an impact in certain spots. So long term, we're going to protect a small area for our vegetables and allow, you know, movement of the bear and deer through the rest of our property. And we don't have dogs anymore. We used to, and that was a bit of a concern, but yeah, it's great to see. So all right, so that's a little bit about the zones. Let's see, do we have any questions about those? I know that, I'm not sure if we answered your question or not.
well, so I had 2. One, I understand now it's just current zones, and it's unlikely that I have a zone 5 because our livestock does walk around in that zone. So I don't know, it seems like it's probably a zone 4. Because it's not, there's no intervention. I mean, they're grazing, so there is intervention.
Right, right.
And the other one was like how many, like could you have multiple zone 4s? Like how, to what detail do you go? Because it gets, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. You could get very, very detailed with this. And I would say in a larger space, that's really not, it's not necessary.
Yeah.
We're going to use this to help with laying out during the design process, laying out certain elements so that they're appropriately placed. Let's see here. There's probably a nice example that we can take a look at. So that's a good zone map, although a little bit imperfect because we do ask for that whole project site area to be designated with some zone or another. And I think there's a steep slope here that hasn't got a designation. And it looks like that's a footpath going back and forth. So that should have something on it. But yeah, other than that, we've got quite a small zone 1 here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which it can be. Ours is pretty small. We do not, I know Bill Mollison would say, look at a 10 or 15 foot band around the house. And that's not the case where I live. If this was our house here, we have a zone 1 at the southern edge and at that western edge, and that's it. That's mainly our zone 1 here. We do not daily head on to the east side, and we do not daily go on the north side. So,
But Bill Mollison said 10 to 15 feet only around the house.
well, that's one of his examples. Is I would say for an urban property, that's probably pretty accurate. Is because there's you want to have those elements pretty condensed, right? When we get into a larger property, I don't know what this is. What are we at? 3 acres. So we get up in the acreage, and that does change a lot. So you don't necessarily visit the perimeter of your house. You might not. But as you can see here, this person has quite a small zone 1, and then there's zone 2, which is actually a little bit difficult to interpret. Uh-oh. Not sure why that happened. Wow. Interesting. Well, we'll try and hold it here. Yeah, so it's a little tricky to see. It looks to me like zone 2 is just out here, and the rest is 3. We have a big zone 3, and then we have quite a large zone 5 here.
And so zone 4 is not on there. You still you still keep it in the legend. Like I don't think I have zone 5.
Yeah, I wouldn't keep it in the legend. I would just delete it. Yeah.
And
Because
then what about all the like the exterior doors? So that's important to have on there, and a trash can and a mailbox.
yeah, well, it that would be up to you. We want to see the doors and any gates on fencing, and
Okay.
that will tie in with our foot traffic patterns. So these are the red dashes are daily, and the orange are every other day. So that again, that this pathway becomes a zone 1, right? Even though you're walking through a zone 5.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting. It's not, I don't think in this situation, it's really going to play into your design. Like this is zone 5, and the fact you have a little path going through it, you're not going to place, in all likelihood, you're not going to place an element, a zone 1 element right here. That would probably be silly. Not a good use of your time and energy. So even though that is zone 1, its use is just for walking and enjoying or traversing to another area. Yeah, so I do have your question here, Elsa. Is there typically only
Yeah, I think you answered it.
Right. So yes, there would be typically only one.
Yeah.
Most likely, unless you have a couple of, say you have a front and back door in your house, and there's something that's kind of dividing those two separate spaces. There may be a case where you have two zone 1s attached to the house, but for the most part, you're probably going to be just one big area. Yeah, and odd shapes, definitely.
Okay.
That can happen. Let's go to see another example here. So that's more of an urban, and this may actually only be 3 zones, because there's not too many areas in an urban environment that are untouched or rarely maintained. Most people are going to be cutting an area once a week, or at least weeding it, but again, this does show you there's a big, in proportion to the whole project site, zone 1 is quite a high percentage. Makes sense. So it's getting used quite a bit. And again, this is the current zone. So one of the things you might find when you go through this is, oh my gosh, I have areas that aren't really being utilized properly, or wow, I've spread myself out a little bit here in my zone 1. We had a client that had a chicken coop. They were on 3 acres, and they had a chicken coop at the far end of their acreage. So every day, multiple times a day, they had a 300-400 foot hike to go see how the chickens are. Now you could say, oh well, you want to get some exercise and see the property, sure, but if your chickens have some predator pressure, that's a long way to go to try and help them out. And if you do have extra time and energy, well, there's probably other things you could be doing. So we just want to try and avoid putting typical zone 1/2 elements, way out in a zone 3 or 4. Okay. So yeah, maybe there are a couple of other examples here. There might not be.
I think there's one below. Like the same, if you just, it's the same slide, but like just, yeah, keep going below.
Oh, I see. Yeah, so that is a little more in alignment with your question, Elsa.
Yeah.
So here again, we have a zone 1 that's quite large, right? It really is. But it is probably large out of necessity. And at least this is the current behavior. And then we have, zone 1 right through 5. So, and this is nice. They've got a legend here as well. We've got some labeling right on the drawing. So that's well done.
That's nice.
Yeah. So that's a great, again, you could get very, very detailed with this. It's much like the microclimate map, which we're going to talk about. You could go into a lot of detail with that. And will that help you? Well, on an urban area, in an urban area, it's probably pretty vital to know and learn your microclimates. Because typically, you might go 3, 4, 5 feet and that microclimate changes quite a bit. You could go from a hot, sheltered, sunny area to a little bit of shade that's moisture. So knowing those are good on these larger sites, it's not really gonna make a whole lot of difference if we're doing that. Now, I skipped over our microclimates. Do we have any other questions about zones at all, or any thoughts about that? Thanks for joining us, Dana. Sorry I didn't say hi when you came on the call here. Are you good with what we've covered with zones, or is there anything you'd like to add to that at all?
Hi. Um, I don't have any questions yet.
Okay. The one thing you may not know, if you look at the chat window, you'll see there's a couple links I put in there, and one's on microclimates and one's on zones, and it's from an introduction to permaculture ebook that Andrew put together a long time ago, and you might find those helpful.
I
Especially,
in the chat of the Zoom call,
yeah.
I'm not seeing anything.
Okay, well,
You can perhaps send it before I joined.
okay,
That
I
be later.
will. I'll repaste it here,
Oh, thank you.
and I'll get the microclimates.
Jamie, I have one more question about zones.
Sure.
So fencing, we have a lot of fencing because of livestock.
Yeah.
It gets super crowded on if I add that on there as well, but you feel like that's important, or should I just indicate fence openings?
Yeah, you can do that. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, where you have some gateways,
Yeah.
because that's probably depending on how you have things set up, but you've probably got water and feed access close to those entry points, and
Yes.
they may even be shared amongst paddocks. So that's where you're going to have a little more activity, or probably less likely to run to the end of it. But sure, that sounds great. However you want to show it. Do you have your fencing? I guess I should back up, because you did mention you have electric fencing that you,
Mhm.
yeah, so because it's not permanent, you don't
It's
really
not.
need to show that. You can, if you have specific spots where you set it up, you could indicate it's just temporary electric netting that you move about, which I'm sure you love and hate.
Yeah.
Yeah. What animals are you
Steers.
raising?
We have steers and pigs.
Ah, nice. That's great. Cool. Yeah, that'd be a little bit tricky with electric. Do you just want run a few wires for that, or?
One
Mhm.
is super light, but they're trained, so they don't
Yeah,
they don't try. They don't even try.
they've had one lesson and that's all it took.
Pretty much.
Yeah, yeah.
Usually when they're young, when they just get here.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Um, all right, I think we've covered zones, unless anybody has anything they want to ask about that, but we can take a look at the microclimate section, and if they're both, if we look at the assignment itself, they're both worth 10 points. So, we want to consider they're equally important, and go back to our template file here. So the microclimates, again, we're going to have your base plan, and we're going to sort of draw an overlay on top of that. So that's one example, although I don't know if I can move this or not. No, this is the master. I haven't made a copy of it. But this is looking great. So we often get that question, is how detailed do you want to get with regards to microclimates? And I would say that really, could be site specific. So in a small urban area, you probably have less in terms of microclimates, and in a larger space, you're going to undoubtedly have more, especially if you had wooded areas. And if you have, in this example, there's water moving through the property. So there's a riparian zone in here. And that will, of course, give you all sorts of interesting microclimates. So here, there's a little bit of a remark in terms of the aspect, and not only the microclimate itself. So we've got full sun and it's dry, but we're south facing slope. So that's very descriptive, right? And that would be in here. So we've got a dry clearing. So what would be the difference? Well, it looks like this is a flat area, or flat-ish, and certainly the contour should reflect that. And again, we're going to exposed lawn. That could be pasture, a muddy driveway, which is too bad. Don't like that. And then some moist edges. And obviously get a lot of wind off the road. And then there's some forested areas that provide some shade, and that shade could be moist or it could be dry, right? So here's a dry, steep shade, and that is a totally different beast, right? Regardless of what you're trying to do in there. If it's dry shade, it's usually a lot harder. And then there's a simpler example. And let's see, what do we have here? 7 different microclimates. Then, of course, I didn't mention, but we want to add some existing plants. So if we go back there, we are asking for 5 different plants. And you only need to put 5 different symbols on here. Sometimes people will say, well, I have a Douglas fir here, but I also have, 20 others, and they might label all of them. And that's not necessary. You can do that if you want, but I would probably advise not to do that, because really the main event here is it's all about these microclimates. We're not dialing into the plant identification at this time, right? Learning a little bit about them and how they match up with these different microclimates. So that's a good exercise, but we're not going through and identifying all plants at this time. Yeah, so we have cool shade, and another note here of frost pockets. So that is that's a good thing to take note of if you have observed that. We've got full sun, we've got some dry, sandy areas, and then a better quality soil that has some moisture and has some shade and is north facing. And then we have basically a description of rooftops, which I wouldn't really worry too much about that unless you have some plans for your roof. I have a friend in a couple hours from where we live that has a cob house and flat roof, and they have solar up on the roof, but they also have planters and plantings up there and a living roof. So it's quite, in their case, it's good to know, right? Because they definitely have optimized what they're doing on the rooftop. And we've got some wooded areas, and some are warmer than others. Some are a little bit cooler. So, yeah. So depending on the size of the property, you may have, may only have 4 or 5 microclimates for an urban area, and you may have 7 or more. Well, how many do we have here? Or it's about 10. But I think once you add water to the mix, you're going to find you get a lot more microclimate, and as well as the wooded areas. So that is a little bit about that. We then ask you to place your plants in here and tell us a little bit about them and where they're growing, and that should match up with the microclimate. And then a little bit about the microclimate attributes themselves and how they behave a little, well, not behave, how they differ in seasons from winter to summer. And then a few photos if you're able. And this is a spot where we start to accumulate a list of some of the existing plants. So when we put together a base plan for our clients, and we document all the existing significant woody plants and make sure they are on the base plan. We also will make note of all of the herbaceous, primarily herbaceous plants that may be there. Although they don't go on the drawing, they're more in a list format that we can pull on when we start looking at a few more details. Let's see here. Yeah, I think that's about it for microclimates. If we go to Andrew's Introduction to Permaculture ebook, we can take a look at that. And again, that link is in the chat. There's probably a couple of videos here that are in the content that you've watched already. And there's even a video transcript if you don't want to watch the video. But all sorts of interesting information. And this really does become, a big part of urban landscapes when you get tall buildings and you have all this shade and wind tunnels that are created by this. But if you're outside of a downtown area, then you don't have this to worry about. And then of course some links here. So just a little bit of extra info just to see if to help people out. So again, I've found this zone definition is really helpful for a lot of folks, and then the microclimates seem to be a little easier to understand. So yeah, so I think that's about all we were going to cover today with
I have a question.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Dana.
So without spending a lot of time observing your site, how do you figure out like what are the ways and methods to figuring out the different like the solar aspect in terms of like how much shaded area the sun causes in different seasons, and or like the wind. How do you figure that out without hypothesizing too much and relying on like the information that you get from the internet?
Yeah, I think
and then like the microclimates as well, like if you haven't observed the site for a long time, and then especially if you were just introduced to that site and you don't have the opportunity to observe it in different seasons. How do you figure out like the changes in the microclimate?
Sure.
Yeah.
Good question. Do you, just to make it easier to answer, are you comfortable putting your project site address in the chat? And we can actually just go into Google Earth.
Yeah, sure. I'm actually driving right now.
Oh,
So
okay.
would I be able to, I can tell you the address.
Okay, let me get I'll get Google Earth Pro started here. It'll take a little bit. I got the stop share here. Hi Andrea, hope you're doing well.
Yeah, we're doing well. We're packing to go to California for 13 days. And so
On the move again.
I was like, oh no, 9 o'clock meeting, I gotta go. Anyways, making granola bars and all the things to pack in the airplane for the kids to be okay.
Yeah. Well, sounds like you could use a holiday, hey? After a busy summer and moving. Yeah. All right. Well, we're just waiting for Google Earth here. Yeah, it'll load in. There we go. Okay, Dana, do you want to just tell me what your address is?
Yeah, or so would you like my project site or like I also have like, because I feel like my project site is pretty simple.
Mhm.
But I'm also like doing things on the side at my home address.
Sure.
I don't know. Does
Wherever
it
you
matter
want.
which one? Okay,
I can go to any site to kind of just show you what I was thinking, but
okay, 7530 North 82nd Circle, Omaha, Nebraska.
all right. So to answer your question, I would say for personally, a lot of what you've asked about, a lot of the initial site observation sort of centers around, and you might find this as you do more designs, centers around the base plan creation. So you sort of get your teeth into a project site and you start documenting it, and it gives you this opportunity, well, to visit it, right? So we like we're just excuse me, we're starting we're kind of in the early phases of a drawing right now where we had a drone survey, and then I've done 2 site visits to document the space that we're designing. And when I'm there, I'm, kind of have the radar, my own radar going, looking at different aspects of the property. And I might even just fire that up and show it to you as well as this. Now I don't know this site as well, but there's some things that we can determine from it just by looking at this image. So if we go onto Google Earth and we're looking at, this is north up. So we pretty much know, I've got a box in front of me here that I just have to wait to have it disappear. Right, try and, yeah, I've started Vectorworks here and it takes forever. And it's right in the middle of my screen, unfortunately. So 2 seconds here. There we are. All right. So there's a lot we can tell about what we're looking at here, in that this is the south wall of the house. So we're going to know that that is going to be a fairly intense area from a solar standpoint. You've got an existing tree here. So it looks like the height of that might influence this area as the sun travels through the day. I guess the sun isn't traveling as we are traveling through the day. So that's one thing. This may be part shade because of the shade cast by this tree. If we go down, say on the east side of a house, so this is where we get late day sun, and that, especially where I am on the west coast here, that can be a really intense heat, very dry space. That potentially could be. You've got another large tree here, and just judging by the shadow, it looks like this space, even, you know, normally the north side would be shaded, but this is going to create even more shade. So that's that we can deduce that. It looks like this is all open. You know, open and sunny. And in fact, we're going to have a part shade area against the fence there. So these are kind of things that you deduce when you're putting the base plan together again. So again, the east side is going to have morning sun. So this would be kind of partial. This is a nice little shady, probably a pretty easy area. It could be a area to sit if you want to escape the heat. So that's kind of how I start to determine that process. Let me I'll show you a very different site here that we're working on. And again, we're just in the beginnings of this. So this is our drone survey. And if I turn off some layers here, that's the high resolution image, which is pretty good. We can zoom in quite well and it doesn't get too pixelated. I have a high definition version of that if I really want to get in close. Then we have some contours. I have 1 foot contours that I've created, and I've got 2 foot contours as well. But you can see here, this site has some challenges in that we have water. There's a river right here at the back of the property, and this neighbor has done some clearing, and there's some erosion going on here, which is a little bit of a concern for my clients who live here. They've got a setback, but there's some things we're going to recommend on this particular project, and one of them is reestablishing vegetation here, because this is not a very big space. And then you can see with the contours, it drops off quite quickly. So this is a very interesting, sorry, Yeah, so on this project, we're just designing the rear of the property. This new homeowner, you can see the existing conditions here. It's sand, right? This is primarily sand, and this would have been in the early part of the summer when we had quite damp weather. So you can see just how little fertility there is. But if we're doing a microclimate map here, this whole area, this whole area is just baking hot, very hot, very dry. I haven't detected a lot of wind there. I haven't been there enough to do so, but you can tell this existing landscape here versus disturbed. You can just imagine how much in terms of support this needs to stay green, right? A lot of water, a lot of nutrient. And what we're going to try and do in this area, and this isn't a very nice pond, but sometimes you'll be brought into projects and there'll be constraints already. Like this pond is here and the homeowners want to keep it. And there's some, there's some good reasons to have some water there. But this is a huge constraint, right? And it's not filled from the rooftop, right? So they have asphalt shingled roofing here. So we wouldn't be able to do that anyways, because if we sent water to this pond, we have a pond full of, could be fire retardants, could be all kinds of nasties coming off that roof that'll affect amphibians that are going to be drawn to that. But yeah, here we have this desert of sorts, and you can see with the neighbor on the left here, this is sort of typical in this area. Big lawns, cut weekly, and a few trees here and there, right? This other neighbor had a bunch of fruit trees, but that neighbor is no longer there and they sold to somebody else. So these are not being managed properly, as well as they've kind of compromised the slope here a little bit. But you can certainly, it doesn't take a lot of observation to figure out the microclimate here. That as well as the zones, right? So we're doing a zone map. Here's our zone 1. And it would come around to the front of the house, probably to there, but this is not a zone 1 here, and it's not zone 1 there. So it's when you get on the larger properties, you're not often drawing a perimeter around the house as a zone 1. But yeah, this is a big challenge, and I'll probably show you a few ideas that we have as we run through this drawing, but we're gonna probably look at the potential of doing some pit planting. So this is something they would do more in a dry climate, but there's so much sand here that I think we could get away with it, rather than if I tried to do that where I live, might not be draining quickly enough during the winter months. But here, yeah. So I'm intrigued. The thing that really drew me into this project was this huge challenge here. How can we vegetate this without using an excess amount of moisture to do so? So some of it will be sending roof water into these pits. And most likely the plantings that we do this strategy with, they won't be edible. So we're not having to worry about those fire retardants going into the plantings. Yeah, so that's kind of early stages for us. Let's see here. So that's kind of where our base plan, how our base plan is looking right now. And again, the topographic here is really important. And I've created two 1 foot and 2 foot models. So mainly because of what's going on the slope, it was hard to get a 1 foot contour map that behaved itself. Yeah. So we are getting near the end of our 1 hour. Does anybody have any questions or anything they want to throw out there regarding this lesson or anything else?
So I talked to the owners of the property that I'm looking at, and they got back to me with traffic patterns of zone use. So it's the second part of the next lesson. And they did it more on a 1 week, 2 week, 3 week, like a month basis, not a day. Like a lot of the ones that I've seen are more like 2 times a day, 3 times a day, but they don't have animals and they don't do very much with their garden right now. And so it could very well be once a week, twice a week kind of
Sure.
thing.
Sure.
So I guess that's the current state of the
Right.
the use, and that's what I would do.
Exactly. So that's exactly what we're doing. Current zones and usage versus when we get towards the end of the course and we start designing our concept plan, we're going to be updating that. So often they will change, and it might be significant and it might not. But yeah, we're strictly looking at how they currently use their space.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jamie, I have a question still about the microclimate. The one slide where all those like trees, shrubs, and other plants are listed on the bottom. Is
Yep.
that something that we build up over time, or are we doing that now where we give 5 different options? Because we haven't really talked about plants.
Okay, I'll just go on to that.
I had an app that might help you if you are able to go to your site, and I used an app that I could just take a picture and then it told me what it was.
Oh,
And so
good.
that might be helpful in just doing a quick identification of the
right.
things you see.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. But and I'm just
There we
wondering, is
are.
it all plants? Is it the inventory of all? No, it's a sample.
Well, ideally, if you're designing for someone else or yourself, but more so if it was a client, you'd be wanting to document all the significant existing woody plants.
Okay.
And that might be very broad, right? It may be that they have, it may be like Andrea's situation. I think your project site is 80 acres or it's quite large. So
Yeah,
to document every single plant, wow, that would be enormous amount of work and really wouldn't get you very far in terms of your design, other than knowing what's there. And you do want to know what's there, but you can have more of a broad brush with a larger site. And this is a good place in our design here to at least document some of those significant plants.
Okay.
Yeah. So do you have to get everything? No. And it may be hard, just learning your plants is a long-term exercise. And when I started in the industry, there was no cell phones or apps or anything like that. It was all having to get books and, it was much slower process. And now they have apps I've never used any of them. I don't feel like I need to, but that's a great way to at least get you closer to identification. It might not be a perfect match, but it might get you close, right? So, yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Andrea.
thank you.
That's something I
use-
don't bring up because I don't use it.
I use the PlantNet app. PlantNet does a really good job, and it has pictures that you can compare to your picture. So it brings you up options, and then you can decide, oh, it's more like that, or it's more like that.
Right.
And then I also double checked on Wikipedia when I got home.
Oh, nice.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, I have a library full of books. However, they're not, they're published and that's it. They don't get updated, and it'll be great when we have more issues with electricity, but
Yeah.
they're heavy and yeah, they cost a lot. So it's just a reflection of, I mean, I spent at least a decade just dialing into plants, first 10 years of my work, and that's really, I was quite obsessed with them. So I don't have to do that now, but
Well, it's good, a wealth of knowledge that you just have, because it still takes time to look it up and make sure you're doing it right, and you don't know if it's the actual
Yeah.
one. Like when I double checked on Wikipedia, some of mine, like, oh, that doesn't even grow here. That's not the right
Right.
choice.
Well, and you know what we end up doing if we want to, I learned this kind of the hard way when I was in my apprenticeship program, and we were asked to do a design of a little space. And I designed it with all these cool plants I just loved, but I was told then that that's really not how you want to go about it. You want to see what's available in your area. So that's how we do this now. We will pull in wholesale prices and wholesale availability lists, which are, pretty boring lists. But we utilize those for plants that we're going to use in within a design. And that way, they're available, at least at the time of your design. And it gives you a little bit of a chance to research them if there's something there that's new that you're not familiar with, because there's always new varieties of things. So yeah, plant lists are a good source for those sort of inspirational planting plans that you put together. Yeah. So does that make sense, Elsa? I'm not
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. So
Yeah,
we're
no, that's
just
fine. I'm not, it's good to go out on the site and get a feel for the plants anyways.
yeah. I mean, we've had the occasional project that was large urban site that had a huge existing planting in it already, and the people wanted to change it. And oh my gosh, it was hours of documentation. It was quite an undertaking just to document what's there. And then you have to look at each one and think, okay, are we keeping that, or are we going to move it, or are we going to get rid of it? So yeah, so that's something to consider if you're looking at a new project and there's a lot of existing material there. That does take quite a bit of time to document. All right. Yeah, I think that's about it from my end. And if there's not any other questions, I'll probably call it a day, and we'll look forward to seeing your assignments next week.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, have a great week, everybody. And thanks again for joining
Thank
me.
you.
Bye, all.
I
Yeah.
appreciate
Bye.
it.
We'll talk to you soon.
Yep. Bye.
Okay.